Have you ever had to make a choice? I don't mean picking what to have for dinner. I mean a real, gut-wrenching, world-shattering choice. The kind of decision that carves a hole in your soul so deep, you know you'll never be able to fill it again. The kind where there is no right answer, only a terrible, necessary wrong one. This is a story about the ultimate father's choice. It starts with a man. Not a soldier. Not some legendary hero from the storybooks. He was an engineer. His hands were more used to holding a datapad and a hydrospanner than a plasma rifle. He was a quiet man whose entire universe wasn't planets or stars or fleets of ships. It was one person. His little girl. She was 6 years old, with a laugh that could make the sterile gray hallways of our orbital station feel like a sunny afternoon back on Earth. He'd tuck her into her bunk at night, under a blanket dotted with cartoon stars, and tell her stories about the brave explorers who first sailed the black ocean above our heads. He promised her they'd see the green fields of home again soon. He promised. He was just one man trying to be a good dad in a universe that had become very, very dark. You see, we weren't alone. And they weren't friendly. They were called the Cathar, a silent, swarming scourge from a system drowned in perpetual twilight. They didn't want to talk, they didn't want to trade. They just consumed. World after world fell silent, their populations gone, their cities stripped to bare metal and bone. We were losing. Every battle, every desperate stand, was just another delay of the inevitable. Hope was a currency that had run out. Our last stand wasn't on some battlefield. It was here, in the cold silence of the research and development sector, buried deep within the armored heart of the station. He worked there along with the brightest minds we had left. Their project was a last desperate roll of the dice. A weapon. Not to destroy a ship or an army, but to destroy a concept. A frequency, a resonant wave that would, in theory, unravel the Cathar's hive-mind connection. Turn their greatest strength, their perfect, silent unity, into their total collapse. It was a ghost of a chance. A prayer written in equations. And for months it was all he thought about. He'd kiss his daughter goodbye in the morning, see the slight worry in her eyes. She was too young to understand war, but old enough to feel the fear that hung in the recycled air, and he'd descend into the lab. He lived in a world of light and data, trying to find a key to save us all. Then the day came. The day the ghost of a chance became our only one. Red lights flashed. Klaxons screamed a sound you never, ever want to hear up here. The piercing shriek of a breach alert. The Cathar had found us. They weren't outside the station. They were inside. Clawing through bulkheads, spilling into the corridors like a tide of living shadow. The station's defenses were crumbling. We had minutes, maybe less. The final command came down from a command deck that was already falling silent. It was time. Activate the weapon. Initiate the resonance sequence. His team moved, a frantic ballet of panic and purpose. But there was a problem. A massive power surge during the initial attack had fried the primary coupling. It was a physical component, ancient and analog, something that couldn't be fixed with code. It had to be replaced. Manually. And it was stored in a secondary storage bay. On the other side of the sector. The exact sector the internal scanners showed was swarming with Cathar drones. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the replacement part, a heavy cylinder of crystalline circuitry, and he ran. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a plan. He just had a destination. Every second he was gone, the weapon couldn't be primed. Every second was another 100 lives lost. The fate of every last human being rested on his shoulders, and on how fast his legs could carry him. He was halfway there, his heart hammering against his ribs, when his personal comlink chirped. A private, encrypted channel. The one that bypassed all station systems. The one that only connected to one other device. His daughter's panic button. The blood in his veins turned to ice. Her voice, tiny and terrified, choked with tears, filled his ear. "Daddy?" The lights went out. And I hear scratching. At the door. It's a bad scratching. "Daddy, please. You promised you'd come. You promised." The world stopped. The screams from the comms, the shudder of impacts against the station's hull, the frantic yelling from his team in his earpiece, it all just faded into a dull, roaring static. In that moment there was no war. No humanity. No weapon. There was only his child. Her fear. And his promise. Every single instinct in his body, every cell that made him a father, screamed at him to turn around. To run to her. To put himself between her and that door until there was nothing left of him. He could almost see the corridor that led to her quarters. It was clear. He could make it. He could save her. But if he did, everyone died. His daughter. Everyone's daughters. Everyone's sons. The entire human race would be extinguished, and it would be because he turned his back on them. It was the choice. The father's choice. The one no one should ever have to make. He stood there, frozen in the hellish, flashing red light of the corridor, a sob catching in his throat. The weight of the crystal component in his arms felt like the weight of a dead star. He could hear her crying, begging for him. He took a breath. And he made his decision. With a hand shaking so hard he could barely control it, he spoke, his voice breaking. Baby, listen to me. Get under the bed. Right now. Be quiet. Be so quiet. Daddy will be there soon. I promise. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie. He was already running again. Away from her. Away from the scratching at her door. He was running toward the weapon, toward the bay, each step feeling like he was tearing his own heart out and leaving it behind him on the cold metal floor. He was making the ultimate humanity sacrifice, and the cost was the one thing that gave his own humanity meaning. He reached the bay. He installed the part. The weapon hummed to life, a sound of beautiful, terrifying power. He'd done it. He'd saved everyone. But as he stood there, listening to the cheers of his team over the comms, all he could hear was the silence from his private channel. A silence that was louder and more horrible than any explosion. He forgot his daughter to save humanity. He turned his back on his promise. The silence from her end of the comlink was a physical weight on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Every second of it was a lifetime of agony. The cheers from his team in his earpiece sounded like they were coming from another universe, a distant, muffled celebration he couldn't be a part of. He had just performed a miracle. He had just given humanity its first real breath of hope in years. And all he wanted to do was scream until his voice was as raw and broken as he felt inside. He stood frozen in the humming bay, the crystal component he'd risked everything for now glowing with a soft, internal light. The weapon was active. The countdown to full resonance was underway. Across the station, reports started to filter in. The Kthar drones, moments from overrunning the command center, had stopped. They were seizing up, collapsing where they stood like marionettes with their strings cut. It was working. The theory was right. He had done it. But his little girl. His baby. That silence was a void swallowing him whole. He tried her channel again, his fingers fumbling, numb with a terror colder than the vacuum of space. Sweetheart? Can you hear me? Answer me, please. Just say something. His voice was a ragged whisper, a desperate prayer sent into the static. Nothing came back. Just that awful, empty quiet. A new voice cut into his private despair. It was the project lead, her tone sharp with urgency, but now layered with something else. Awe. It's a complete cascade. Their network is fracturing. They're just shutting down. I don't believe it. You did it. You actually did it. He didn't answer. He couldn't form the words. What could he say? Thank you? I'm glad? His victory felt like ash in his mouth. The lead's voice softened, the professional edge melting away to reveal the human beneath the scientist. She'd met his daughter once, brought her a spare converter chip to fiddle with like a toy. Your run? The storage bay is in a cleared sector now. Security teams are mobilizing to retake the station, deck by deck. They'll sweep the residential blocks first. They'll find her. He knew she was trying to comfort him. He knew she believed it. But he had heard the scratching at the door. He had heard the pure, undiluted fear in his daughter's voice. The security teams would be methodical, careful. They would clear areas of active threats first. They would take time. And time was the one thing he was terrified he didn't have. His mind started to betray him, flashing images behind his eyes. Her small hand holding his, trusting him completely to guide her through a crowd. The way her face would light up when he came home, even after a grueling 16-hour shift. The night she'd been scared of a thunderstorm on Earth, and he'd held her until she fell asleep, telling her it was just the sky telling stories. He had always been her shelter. Her safe place. And in the moment she needed him most, he had chosen to be somewhere else. This was the hidden cost of survival, the brutal math of war that they never put in the history books. It wasn't just about soldiers and battles. It was about the quiet, personal hells endured in sterile corridors. It was about the humanity sacrifice that happened away from the glory, the choices that saved a species but shattered a soul. He had made the father's choice and now he had to live inside it. The question was, could he? A new alert, softer this time, chimed through the bay. The main power grid was coming back online, section by section. Lights flickered to full brightness, banishing the ominous emergency red. The hum of life support normalized. The station was waking up from its nightmare. But for him, the nightmare was just deepening. With power restored, the internal surveillance systems began to reboot. Monitor screens around the bay blinked on, showing camera feeds from all over the station. His eyes, desperate and wild, scanned them, looking for any sign, any glimpse of the residential wing. He saw security teams in heavy armor moving cautiously through torn-up corridors. He saw the still, grotesque forms of the Kthar drones littering the ground. He saw medical teams rushing to the wounded. But her corridor, her door, the feed was dark. Damaged in the fighting, probably. He was about to turn and run, to just abandon his post and sprint through the now secure halls, consequences be damned, when another screen caught his eye. It was a feed from a camera near the main hangar bay, an area that had been a primary breach point. The fight there had been brutal. And he saw something that made the blood drain from his face. Amid the wreckage of a blasted open airlock, surrounded by fallen drones, was a Kthar ship. But it wasn't like the others. It was smaller, sleeker. A command pod maybe. And its hatch was open. Empty. The Kthar were a hive mind, everyone knew that. They didn't have leaders, not in the way we understand. They were a collective. A single will. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. Why would a separate, distinct ship be here? Had someone, been directing the attack from right here on the station? A new, colder fear began to wrap around his heart, intertwining with his personal terror. What if the scratching at his daughter's door wasn't just some mindless drone following its programming? The thought was too horrible to fully form. It was a shadow in his mind, a dread that he couldn't quite see but could feel, cold and slithering. The weapon's resonance had shut down the drones. But what if it hadn't reached whatever was in that pod? What if something was still loose on the station? Something that had been smart enough to hide, to wait? Something that had seen the heart of the station's defense, and seen its weakness? His eyes shot back to the dark screen that should have shown his daughter's hallway. The silence on the comlink wasn't just silence anymore. It was a question. A terrifying, awful question. He had saved humanity. But as he stood there in the bright, humming silence, a new and horrifying realization dawned on him. The battle for the station might be over. But his battle had just taken a much, much darker turn. His feet were moving before his mind had fully processed the command, carrying him out of the bay and into the corridor. He wasn't running toward something anymore. He was running from the image in his head, from the chilling possibility that his father's choice might have been for nothing. That his terrible, soul-crushing sacrifice might have been in vain. The station around him was a testament to the battle. Bulkheads were scarred with deep, acidic burns. Panels were torn open, spilling out knots of wiring like metallic intestines. The air still smelled of ozone and something else, something bitter and alien. He passed a group of medics tending to a wounded security officer, and the man's pained grimace was a mirror of the agony twisting inside his own chest. This was the cost of survival, the price of humanity's sacrifice, paid in blood and pain and broken promises. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. The raw, frantic energy of a parent's fear was the only fuel he needed. He dodged around repair crews, his eyes fixed ahead, his personal comlink pressed hard against his ear, as if he could force a sound to come through by sheer will. "Sweetheart, if you can hear me, just breathe. Just let me hear you breathe." His voice was a broken thing, a whisper choked with tears he couldn't afford to shed yet. Still nothing. He rounded a corner into the residential sector, and his heart stuttered. This was where the fighting had been thickest. The damage here was worse. Doors were blasted off their hinges. The familiar, soft lighting of the living quarters was gone, replaced by the harsh, intermittent flash of emergency strobes, making the devastation look like a series of frozen nightmares. He knew her door was at the end of the hall. His legs felt like lead. Every step was a mountain. The silence from the comlink was a physical force pushing back against him. This was it. This was the moment he would find out what his choice had truly cost. He could see her door. It was closed. But it wasn't untouched. Deep, parallel grooves, claw marks, were gouged into the reinforced metal around the seal. The scratching. He'd heard it. He'd heard this. His stomach turned to ice. He stumbled the last few feet, his hand reaching out, trembling so violently he could barely press the access panel. It was dead. Locked down from the main power surge. With a cry of frustration that was half sob, he wedged his fingers into the seam of the door and pulled, putting all his weight into it. Muscles screamed in his back and shoulders, but the door didn't budge. He was an engineer, not a soldier. He was weak. He had always been weak. "Please." He begged the unmoving metal, his forehead pressed against its cold surface. "Please let me in." A sound. It was faint, almost lost under the moan of straining metal and the distant sirens. But he heard it. From the other side of the door. A tiny muffled sound. A whimper. It was the most beautiful and the most horrifying sound he had ever heard. She was alive. But she was hurt. She was terrified. "I'm here. I'm right here. Daddy's here," he shouted, his voice cracking with a mixture of relief and fresh panic. He pulled again at the door, his fingers raw and bleeding now. Nothing. He had to get to a manual override. There was one at the end of the hall, but it meant leaving the door. It meant turning his back on her again. The father's choice was back, a cruel joke repeated. Stay and be useless or leave for a chance to help. He made the choice. Again. He forced himself to run down the hall, his eyes blurred with tears. The override panel was behind a clear cover. He smashed it with his elbow, ignoring the glass biting into his skin, and yanked the large lever down. Back at her door, a hydraulic hiss sighed into the corridor. The door slid open an inch. Then stopped. It was jammed, twisted in its frame by the damage outside. It was just enough of a gap. Enough for him to see inside. The room was dark, lit only by the blinking light of a forgotten data pad on the floor. Her small bed was overturned. The blanket with cartoon stars was torn, lying in a heap near the door. And there, curled in the farthest, darkest corner, under the reinforced girder of her overturned bed frame, was a small shape. She was hiding. Just like he'd told her to. She was so still. So quiet. "Baby, it's me," he whispered, squeezing his body through the narrow opening, scraping his sides against the sharp metal. He didn't feel it. All he felt was the overwhelming need to reach her. He was halfway into the room when he froze. The air changed. It wasn't just the smell of fear and dust anymore. There was a new scent. Metallic. Ugly. Wrong. And then he saw it. Movement. In the deep shadows on the ceiling, directly above where his daughter was hiding. It uncurled itself, long and spindly, moving with a silent, liquid grace that was utterly unnatural. It was smaller than the drones but more complex, more designed. Its surface wasn't a carapace. It seemed to shift and change, absorbing the little light in the room. This was no mindless foot soldier. This was something else. Something that had ridden the wave of the attack, hidden, waiting for the perfect moment. The empty pod. This was what had been inside. It had been toying with her. The scratching. The silence. It hadn't just been trying to get in. It had been hunting. And now it had found its prize. It had used her fear, her calls for him, as bait. And he had swum right into the trap. The creature's head, if it could be called that, tilted down. A single, faint pinprick of red light focused on him. It wasn't an eye. It was a sensor. It was studying him. Recognizing him. He understood then, with a clarity that was colder than space. The weapon hadn't failed. It had worked perfectly. It had shattered the hive. But this thing, this wasn't part of the hive. It was the source. The conductor. And it was alone. And it was angry. His father's choice had saved humanity from the swarm. But it had led him directly to the heart of the storm. He was trapped in a dark room with his daughter, with the very intelligence that had commanded the annihilation of worlds now poised to take the one thing he had left. He had no weapon. No plan. No hope of backup in time. The creature shifted its weight, its claws, long, thin, and sharper than any blade, unfolding silently as it prepared to drop from the ceiling. He had saved everyone else. Now, the only thing left to save was the reason he had done it all in the first place. And he had nothing left to fight with but his own two hands. Time didn't just slow down, it shattered. Every fragment of a second was a lifetime. He saw the dust motes dancing in the beam of light from the corridor. He saw the tiny, terrified tremble of his daughter's form under the bed frame. And he saw the creature, a nightmare-given form, coiling its limbs to strike. There was no plan. No heroic speech. There was only a raw, animal instinct that roared to life from a place deeper than fear, deeper than reason. It was a sound that started in the pit of his soul and tore out of his throat, a wordless, guttural cry of defiance. He didn't charge. He threw himself. Not at the creature but forward into the space between it and his daughter. He was a shield. Flesh and bone against whatever nightmare science that thing was made of. He landed hard on his side, scraping across the floor, his body slamming into the overturned bed frame, jolting it. A small, shocked gasp came from beneath it. He was blocking her. It would have to go through him. The creature dropped. It was utterly silent, a blot of darkness falling from the shadows. It landed in a crouch between him and the broken door, cutting off the light, cutting off escape. That single red sensor fixed on him, and for a terrifying second he felt it, Not anger, not hatred. Something worse. Curiosity. A cold, analytical study of an interesting obstacle. It took a step forward, its clawed feet making no sound on the metal floor. He scrambled backward, pushing himself tighter against the bed frame, his hands searching blindly for anything. A piece of broken plating, a tool, a rock, but there was nothing. He was unarmed. He was helpless. This was the true face of their enemy. Not a mindless swarm, but a cunning, isolated intelligence. The hive was gone. This was the queen, the general, the architect of their ruin. And it was trapped here with him. The man who had destroyed its army. The irony was so bitter he could taste it. His mind, trained to solve problems, to find patterns, raced uselessly. There was no equation for this. No schematic for survival. This was the end of his humanity's sacrifice. Not a glorious death in battle, but a quiet, brutal execution in a child's bedroom, with his little girl watching. The creature took another step, its head tilting. A low frequency vibrated from it, not a sound heard by the ears, but a pressure felt in the teeth and the bones. It was communicating. Or scanning. He didn't know. He didn't care. "You won't have her," he whispered, the words tasting like dust and blood. It was a promise to himself. The last one he would ever make. He braced for the final lunge, for the pain, for the end. He tried to make his body bigger, to be a wall. But the lunge never came. The creature stopped. Its sensor light flickered from him, past him, to the space under the bed frame. To his daughter. The vibration changed, shifting in pitch. It wasn't looking at a threat anymore. It was looking at data. A resource. And then he understood. A new, even more profound horror dawning, so cold and vast it stole the air from his lungs. It didn't want to kill them. Not immediately. The hive mind was broken. Shattered by his weapon. This thing was alone. Completely, utterly alone for the first time in its existence. And a hive mind cut off is the most lonely thing in the universe. It wasn't here for revenge. It was here for a replacement. It needed a new network. A new consciousness to bind to command. It couldn't use the adults. Our minds were too rigid, too individual. But a child's mind, young, flexible, impressionable, it could be molded. Rewired. It could become the new core of a new hive. Right here. Right now. His sacrifice wasn't just about losing his life or hers. It was about the corruption of her very soul. It was about his little girl, the one he had promised to protect, becoming the nucleus of a new horror that would once again threaten all of humanity. His terrible choice on the corridor would be made meaningless. He would have saved everyone, only to deliver the one thing that could destroy them all, right into the enemy's hands, and it would be wearing his daughter's face. The creature took a final step, its intention clear now. It wasn't going to kill him. It was going to incapacitate him. It was going to make him watch. It would force him to witness the erasure of everything his little girl was, to see her eyes go blank and hear her voice become an instrument for that awful vibrating frequency. His father's choice had led to this, not just death but damnation. He looked from the advancing horror to the sliver of his daughter's terrified face in the shadows. He saw her eyes, wide with a fear no child should ever know. And in that moment he wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a hero. He was just a father, staring into the abyss, realizing that the true cost of humanity's sacrifice was a price he would not pay. He had nothing left to give. Nothing left to fight with. Except the one thing it wanted most. He made a new choice. The creature was done studying. It understood the situation perfectly. The father was an obstacle. The child was the prize. A new core. A new beginning. It took that final, silent step, one clawed limb rising, not to strike a killing blow, but to incapacitate, to paralyze him. To make him a prisoner in his own body, forced to watch the unmaking of his child. He saw the limb tense, a needle-like point glinting in the dim light. There was no time. No weapons. No hope. But he had one thing left. The one thing the creature, for all its intelligence, could never understand. It saw a mind to be overwritten. It saw a biological machine to be repurposed. It didn't see her. It didn't see the little girl who loved cartoon stars and believed her daddy could fix anything. It didn't understand the power of a promise made in the dark. As that needle-sharp limb shot toward his chest, he didn't try to block it. He didn't flinch away. He did the one thing the creature could never have predicted. He moved toward it. He lunged forward, off balance, throwing himself directly into the path of the strike. The impact was like a punch of pure ice, a cold so intense it burned right below his collarbone. He gasped, a shock of numbness spreading instantly through his shoulder and down his arm. But he kept moving, his own momentum carrying him forward. He wrapped his one good arm around the creature's spindly, shifting torso and slammed it backward, away from the bed, away from his daughter. They crashed against the far wall, a tangle of desperation and alien limbs. The creature was shockingly light, but impossibly strong. It writhed in his grasp, its cold, hard form scraping against him. That single red sensor was inches from his face, blazing with what he could now feel was surprise, then fury. It was not used to being touched. Not like this. The numbness was spreading, a cold tide creeping toward his heart. He could feel his grip weakening. His vision began to tunnel, darkening at the edges. This was it. He had maybe seconds left. With the last of his strength, he did the only thing he could think of. He wasn't a soldier. He was an engineer. He solved problems. And his comlink was still active, the channel to the lab still open in his ear, the microphone on his collar still live. He couldn't shout. He couldn't form words. His breath was a ragged, failing thing. But he could make sound. He focused everything he had, every last bit of his fading consciousness, and he began to hum. It was weak, off-key, broken by pain and the cold seizing his lungs. It was the same tuneless, silly little melody he hummed every night to his daughter when she couldn't sleep. The one from the old video of her mother, the one that always made her smile. It was a piece of home. A piece of them. A piece of humanity. In his ear, the project lead's voice, frantic. What is that? Is that you? What's happening? Report. The creature froze. The vibration coming from it stuttered, confused. This signal made no sense. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't data. It was noise. Illogical, emotional, useless noise. And from under the bed frame, a tiny, shaking voice answered his hum. She was singing the next few notes, the words she'd made up for it. A child's voice, pure and terrified, cutting through the horrific silence of the room. The creature recoiled as if struck. The two signals, the father's dying hum, the daughter's fragile song, created a dissonance it couldn't process. Its own shattered hive mind was a thing of perfect, cold order. This was chaos. This was love. It was a virus to its logic. In the lab, the lead understood. She was a mother too. The frequency. It's rejecting the emotional resonance. It's overloading its processing. Hold on. Just hold on. He couldn't hold on. The cold was in his chest now. His hum faded into a faint, breathy whisper. His eyes started to close. But he had given them what they needed. In the lab, they isolated the sound, his hum, her song, and amplified it. They fed it back through the station's comm system, through the PA, targeting the residential sector. It wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of memory, of love. The hallway outside the broken door filled with the sound. It was gentle, then strong, a wave of pure human emotion pouring into the room. The creature shrieked. A soundless, psychic scream of agony that he felt in his mind. It wasn't a sound of pain, but of utter system failure. The song, their song, was an antibody attacking a virus. The thing that had commanded armies and consumed worlds was being unmade by a lullaby. It convulsed in his arms, its form flickering, destabilizing. The red sensor light blazed once, impossibly bright, and then shattered into 1,000 dim fragments before going dark forever. The creature went still. Not dead but empty. A server wiped clean, a clock with no spring. Just an inert, bizarre sculpture of forgotten technology. The weight of it collapsed on top of him as the last of his strength gave out. He lay on the cold floor, the dead creature pinning his legs, the ice in his own veins claiming him. The beautiful, amplified song echoed in the hall, but it was fading from his hearing. The last thing he saw was his daughter crawling out from under the bed. Her small, beautiful face, streaked with tears, appeared above him. Her tiny hand touched his cheek. "You came back," she whispered. He tried to smile. He tried to tell her he loved her. But the cold was everywhere. His eyes closed. He had made the ultimate humanity sacrifice. He had given everything. But as darkness took him, he felt the faint, warm pressure of her hand on his skin. And he knew. It had been worth it. For a long moment, there was only the small, dim room. The little girl knelt on the cold floor, her father's head cradled in her lap. Her tears fell onto his still, pale face, tracing clean lines through the grime and sweat. She kept humming their song, the tune shaky and soft, a desperate prayer against the overwhelming quiet. The first sound that broke the stillness wasn't a boot or a voice. It was a faint, almost imperceptible sigh from the ventilation system as it finally, fully restored to normal operation. Then, the lights in her room flickered once, twice, and then glowed with a steady, warm light, banishing the last of the terrifying shadows. The light seemed to wake something in him. A shudder ran through his body. His chest rose in a sudden, ragged, and deep gasp for air, as if he'd been drowning and had just broken the surface. The unnatural cold that had been claiming him receded, chased away by the stubborn, fierce warmth of a human heart that refused to stop beating. His eyes fluttered open, blurry and unfocused, finding her face. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. A single tear escaped the corner of his eye and rolled down into his hairline. His good hand, trembling weakly, came up and covered her small one where it still rested on his cheek. The connection was made. The circuit was complete. He was back. The sound of heavy, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, followed by the beam of a powerful flashlight cutting through the gap in the door. Hello? Is anyone in there? Life signs are reading unstable in this sector. A security officer, her armor scarred and smeared with alien residue, carefully widened the gap in the door and stepped through, her rifle raised but pointed at the floor. Her trained eyes scanned the room in a second. The destroyed furniture, the inert, bizarre form of the creature, the man lying gravely injured, and the little girl protecting him. Her professional composure cracked. Medic? I need a medic and a stretcher in here now, she yelled over her shoulder, her voice thick with emotion. She knelt, holstering her weapon, her movements gentle. Hey, sweetheart. It's okay. You're safe now. We're here. The little girl just looked at her, then back at her father, not letting go. She had trusted one person today and it had almost cost him everything. She wouldn't let go again. The medics arrived, their efficiency a calm and welcome relief. They carefully moved the strange alien body off of him, studying it with a mixture of awe and revulsion before securing it for the science teams. They worked on him, injecting him with stimulants and coagulants, stabilizing the wound on his chest, which was already beginning to bruise a horrifying shade of black and blue. He winced as they moved him onto the stretcher, but his eyes never left his daughter. His hand never let go of hers. As they carried him out into the brightly lit corridor, now full of people and noise and the blessed ordinary chaos of survival, he saw it. People were emerging from other rooms, dazed and weeping, embracing each other. They were alive. They were all alive. The humanity's sacrifice had not been in vain. The weight of that knowledge settled over him, not as a burden but as a blanket. He had carried that weight for so long and now he could finally share it. Days turned into weeks. The station, named Sanctuary, began to truly earn its name. The story of what happened spread, not as an official report filled with technical jargon, but as a legend. The story of the engineer who ran into hell to turn on the lights, and the little girl whose song turned off the dark. It became a story of a father's choice and what it really meant. Not just the choice to leave but the choice to come back in every way that mattered. He recovered slowly. The physical wound healed, leaving a pale, star-shaped scar. The deeper wounds took longer. He had nightmares of cold silence and scratching at the door. He would wake up gasping and she would be there, sometimes asleep in the chair next to his medbay bed, clutching her starry blanket. He'd watch her breathe and the fear would slowly ebb away. The scientists, once they got over their shock, were fascinated by the creature. The lead researcher came to see him, datapad in hand. We're calling it a node, she said, her voice full of a scientific excitement she couldn't quite contain. It wasn't a queen. It was more like a seed. A backup. Its sole purpose was to find a new consciousness to build a new hive around if the primary one was ever destroyed. Your daughter? It saw her potential. Her neural plasticity. He felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with his injury. The thought of what almost happened would never fully leave him. The scientist saw his expression and quickly softened. But it didn't count on you. It didn't understand the human heart. The emotional resonance of your connection, that song, it was a logic bomb. It completely fried its core programming. It's inert. Just metal and weird biology now. She paused, looking at him not as a subject but as a man. You didn't just save her. You gave us the key. We're reverse engineering the node's technology. We think we can use its own principles, its connection protocols, to create a new network for ourselves. Not a hive mind, a shared one. A way to truly understand each other, to heal the trauma of this war. You didn't just save us from extinction. You might have given us a way to finally, truly come together. It was a future he could never have imagined. Born from the worst moment of his life, a possibility for a better world was emerging. Finally he was discharged. He stood on his own 2 feet, a little weaker, a little older, holding his daughter's hand. They walked through the station not as a place of terror anymore but as a home. They stopped at a large viewport, looking out at the star-dusted blackness. Earth hung in the distance, a blue and white marble, whole and untouched. He picked her up and she rested her head on his shoulder, her trust in him absolute once more. He had kept his promise. He had come back. "I'm sorry I was late," he whispered into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. She pulled back and looked at him, her eyes serious beyond her years. "It's okay, Daddy. You were saving everybody." In that moment he saw the full circle of their humanity's sacrifice. It wasn't just about loss. It was about what you chose to protect. It was about the love that remained, stronger for having been tested. He had saved humanity for her, and in the end she had saved humanity with him. They had done it together. The stars outside held no fear anymore. They were just lights. Possibilities. And as he held his daughter, the two of them safe and together, watching the silent, beautiful proof of their survival turning slowly in the void, he knew the greatest victory wasn't in the grand technology or the defeated enemy. It was in this quiet moment. It was in a father's embrace. It was in a child's forgiveness. It was in the simple, unbreakable human connection that had, against all odds, endured. The story of their survival was over. The story of their future was just beginning. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that finale. This story was a journey about the choices we make and the love that guides us, even in the darkest times. If this sci-fi story hit home for you, if you felt that humanity's sacrifice, do me a huge favor, give the video a thumbs up and share it with someone who'd love it. It really helps the channel out. Thanks for watching, and thanks for believing that even in the darkest corners of space, a father's love can still light the way. See you in the next one.